Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome to another episode of GEEXX Reads. A little break from my usual format. I've kind of avoided doing sequels to books in my reviews so far. Not entirely sure why, I just haven't done it. But when I read the book, when I did the review for C.J. Cherryh's Foreigner, I did kind of flip through the book a little bit to try and refresh my memory on some of the stuff that happened in the book. And I just wound up reading the whole book in a couple of days after I did my review. Just had to drop through and read it again. I mentioned in my review that's one of my favorite sci-fi books, and I reread it. I've probably the 12th time I've read the book, and then I kept going. I read Invader, the stunning sequel to Foreigner, which there's an image of here, thanks to my massively awesome editing skills. So I try very hard to avoid giving spoilers, but I'm going to have to for the Foreigner book, for the previous book in the series. So if you haven't read the book yet and you're interested in it, and you want to do without spoilers, then, avoid this until you've read the first book and watched my first review of the Foreigner book. But if you don't really care, and considering these small numbers of subscribers that I have, you probably don't. But I felt it was only fair to give you a warning that I am going to be spoiling some stuff from the first book. Because this book takes place within 24 to 48 hours of the first book. This book takes place immediately after and is directly impacted by the events of the first book. As this book opens, Bren Cameron is basically being rushed from surgery to the airport. Tabini, the leader of the Ativai government, the IAG of the Western Association, has demanded his immediate return. The impacts of the first book are immediately referenced in this. When Bren went missing, because Tabini sent him to the middle of the continent, into his grandmother's care, and he was missing for a week, the human government panicked when they couldn't contact Bren, especially considering the fact that Phoenix has returned from whatever space journey it's been on, and it's up at the now defunct space station looking for someone to talk to. The Mospherian government panicked and sent Bren's replacement, his second in command, or not second in command, but like his successor, the person who would take the job if he died or retired. This woman, Deanna Hanks, Tabini threatened to shoot her if they didn't send Bren Cameron back. We don't learn that till a bit later in this book, but it's not a huge giveaway. The events I'm going to describe I am going to spoil some stuff in this book, but it's mostly stuff that happens in the first few chapters. In the first book, Bren is shuttled off to Malguri into the care of the Dowager, the IEG Dowager, Ilisidi, Tabini's grandmother, because no one told Bren about this, but Phoenix had returned, had docked to the space station. Communications were flying back and forth. The Ativai suspected betrayal on the part of the humans, or collusion with the Phoenix, and to try and gauge whether or not they've been betrayed, they didn't tell Bren anything and just sent him off to Ilisidi, who is basically part of a faction who is opposed to the humans. And Bren's honesty kind of won her over a little bit, not entirely, but man, she is a scoundrel. I love her. Doesn't show up as much in this book, unfortunately, but the scenes that she is in is just, scenes that she is in this book are perfect, even though she's not here very often. Love that grassly old woman. Bren is basically, the reason he's in surgery is because he was questioned rather forcefully towards the end of the book. So they kind of, broke his shoulder, I think, a little bit. He had to have some surgery on his shoulder. He's basically bleary from anesthetics, on pain medication. He has no time to stop off at his office to download new files to his computer and hop on the airplane back to Shejidan. And that's where he arrives. He arrives in Shejidan having to deal with Deanna Hanks, his successor, basically only got her position because of her father has money and influence in the government. She is not anywhere near as good as Bren is with the language. She hates Ativai as much as Ilicidi's companions hate humans. She has no regard for their culture or anything else about them. She has no regard for anything about them except how she thinks humans can use them to further their own ambition. And, when there's only supposed to be one Paihi translator on the mainland, and she refuses to leave. And her backers in the government have enough authority to keep her there against the treaty. And she is making all kinds of trouble. And again, the Ativai that Bren has to associate with are wondering what the hell's going on, because she's there in violation of the treaty. Does Bren still have authority, to negotiate? Is he still in his position? Because if not, he knows that he's useless to them. But he has given some assurances by his boss in the Foreign Office that he's still, that he is still in his position. So everything that happened in the first book has a direct impact on what happens in this book. This is just another political thriller, just with more going on the line. Mosferia is talking to the humans on Mosferia are talking to the Phoenix, the ship. They're not talking to the Ativai to let them know what they're saying. They're not including them in the situation at all. But since all the resources are on the mainland with the Ativai, they've got their own radar listening dish. They can hear the conversations. They know they're being cut out. So there's a lot going on in this book. It's, again, a little bit slow, like I said about the first book. But it is a direct continuation of the Foreigner book. Like I said, it takes between 1 and 2 days afterwards. Bren doesn't have time to recover. He lands in Shejidan looped up on pain pills and not in full possession of his faculties when he desperately needs to be. And much like the first book, he is scrambling. But in the first book, he was scrambling to figure out what the hell was going on. He sort of knows what's going on here. I mean, there's still factions within the human government that aren't talking to him, and they're trying to, wheel and deal around him to get their own way. And they're lying about him. Some of their opinions of him, he can see because he disappeared for a week. They have no idea where he went, and Tabby's not telling them. But Deanna Hanks, his successor, is just a bitch. Again, early in the book, when Bren meets with Tabini again to talk about why he was sent back, and he kind of smooths things over, and Tabini's like, should I shoot this woman? He is literally very calmly, because if you've read the first book, you know that the Ativai have no word for friendship, but they've got like a dozen different words for assassination. Friendship is not part of their biological makeup, not part of their mental DNA. It's an alien concept to them. But they understand assassination. And assassination is legal in their culture. They do try and mitigate, the Assassin's Guild does try to mitigate against that. They do try and talk people down and say, do you want to try, should you mediate through the courts? Do you want to talk about this? That's a perfectly, but the Assassin's Guild carries out assignments, and there are rules for when people are allowed to be shot. The Assassin's Guild carries out all legal all legal assassinations. So yeah, there's a couple times when people suggest that maybe Deanna Hanks should be shot. And I kind of agree with them. She's a pain in the ass. Uh, she makes things far more difficult than needed to be. Um, but I've spoiled as much of the story as I think I can. Um, I hope, again, political thriller. Again, you could rewrite this in for American culture. Really, you really could. It's just as good as the first book. Slightly different because, like I said, Brent, he's not as confused in this book about what's going on. This is more, he's just scrambling for damage control to try and, repair the damage that has been done with the Phoenix showing up in orbit, with the mistakes his government has made, and mistakes that the Attiva government has made. Although they don't view it as mistakes, for them, the things they did were perfectly reasonable, and Brent understands that it was reasonable from their perspective. But still, if they hadn't done those things would have, and just told Bren what was going on, things would have gone a lot smoother. But they couldn't know that. They went with their gut instincts. From their point of view, it looked like they were being screwed over, and they were trying to assess whether or not they were, and they couldn't just come out and tell Bren that's what they wanted, because if he was screwing them over, he would lie to them. So they tried to organize things to get him to get an honest reaction out of him and to get him to tell the truth, so that they could believe that he was telling the truth. So, yeah, it's dealing with the mistakes of both the human government and the Attiva government, and Bren playing damage control. The first book is still my favorite in the series and one of my favorite science fiction books of all time. This is a good sequel. It's not quite as A+ in my opinion as Foreigner is, but Invader is more like an A-. It's still good, and it's, it doesn't have the problem that most sequels have, is that they're not as good as the first one. This isn't better than the first one. It's only slightly, in my opinion. It's slightly less good. It's still really good. As you could tell, because like I said, I put the first one down and immediately I devoured, these books very, very quickly. Helps that, I'd read them before, so I didn't have to pay attention as much. I could just kind of skim through them. But this book is 400. Oh no, wait, that's the glossary crap. 454 pages long, and the first book was almost as much. So I devoured 900 pages of the material in a very short period of time, like 2 or 3 days apiece. So yes, I would recommend this as almost as much as I would recommend the first book in the Foreigner series. So read Foreigner and then read Invader. We'll talk about other books in the series some other time. As always, thanks for watching. If you like my videos, why would you do that to yourself? But if you're interested in inflicting more misery upon yourself, watch my other crap. And until next time, as always, good hunting.